Thank you to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be doing a redrawing art challenge, I guess. So this is one of my very old art that I've done in Paint Tool Sai in 2011. Therefore, we're not going to be using Clip Studio Paint today. We are going to be also using Paint Tool Sai today, as that was my favorite program for quite a while, especially when I was younger, starting off with doing digital art. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just like process, kind of like the mindset that I had, as well as more about the art on the very right. So the character on the very right is actually Kagamine Rin. You might know them as like a Vocaloid, which is like, you know, similar to Hatsune Miku, but this is Kagamine Rin, and then there's a mirror twin called Kagamine Len, and they were like something I had like a hyperfixation on back when I was in like middle school, high school days, I would say. And the friend that got me into drawing anime art or drawing just like in general during my middle school days was actually a fan of Vocaloid as well. So kind of like in turn, I adopted a lot of like the same likes and interests as her. As we started talking more and more, I found interest in like, you know, Vocaloid music, J-pop, obviously like anime and manga and all that stuff. So you guys probably haven't seen this art before, unless it's still up on my DeviantArt. Maybe it's up there. I'm not too sure if this one's actually posted, but it's actually a screen capture that I took from one of my very first videos, I think, on my channel. Now, if you guys go back on my channel and actually take a look on what my first video actually was, you will not see this piece. I have like, I think 5 or 6 old videos that I've archived for different reasons. One being is that I don't even know if I said this kind of like lore about my channel before, which is the fact that the reason I started posting around 2010, 2011 at the time was I didn't really understand the concept of YouTube and like video recording, time lapses, all that stuff. So initially when me and my 2 friends that were like really into art and drawing at the time, we would be like chatting on, is it Messenger? No, not Messenger. What is it called? MSN. We'd be using MSN to talk, but like we would have no way to really show our drawings to each other other than actually posting our whips and sketches to DeviantArt and then sending each other, you know, like come check out my page and stuff so you can see what I'm working on. So it took a little bit for me to, you know, find a program to screen record, and I would screen record myself drawing and sketching whatever I was drawing and like speeding it up in some sort of like editing program and sharing it with my friends. And because I didn't really understand how YouTube work or like how videos were shared or seen, I thought me posting it, I guess in this case publicly, and sending the link directly to my friends was the only way for people to actually view the video. But obviously that was not the case, so there was always like, you know, more views than usual, or like, you know, traffic from different sites and stuff maybe pick up on the video for whatever reason, or if I did post it to my DeviantArt, maybe some people, you know, eventually find it on YouTube, whatever. So because of that, I was not actually very aware that I was posting some stuff that was more personal-ish and sharing it what I thought was just to my friends, and it was just kind of like out in the open for the whole entire public to see. So there's like things like their MSN messages popping up and like notifications and stuff. So I decided to archive some of those older videos. Some of them were even like just eye tutorials that I was doing to show my friends in real time how I colored eyes at the time in Paint Tool Sai. So a lot of the times me and my friends would exchange our YouTube clips to one another. So I don't really see it a reason to leave it up on the channel, because like I said, sometimes you see our MSN messages and stuff pop out, because I didn't know anything about like video editing either, or like, you know, what should be on the internet, what should not be on the internet. Does that make sense? But I did forget to talk about one thing regarding what we're doing today. So one, yes, this is a redraw of the Kagamine Rin drawing on the very right hand side, which is just like a black and white sketch I did in Paint Tool Sai. And I remember bits and bobs of like parts that happened during the time when I was like recording it or when I posted it, because like I said, sometimes I would get random people commenting on my videos which I didn't know who they were. They were complete strangers, and I remember one comment saying oh, this was good, but what happened at the very end? And I think that's like when I started to add details to the face, and it just like threw everything off, besides the fact that there's like many things wrong with the sketch in general. But other than doing a redraw of the drawing that's like on the right, I am also doing kind of like a 1-layer challenge, because technically when I posted the first video in 2011, it was supposed to be like a 1-layer challenge, which is why kind of like the sketch style is very different. You can kind of see like in her hair, it's kind of more like of a carved kind of texture rather than like sketchy lines, which is how usually I approach sketching. But before we get too far into the drawing, let's go ahead and take just a little bit of a break for now. Okay, so before we carry on with more of this sketch, let me show you some snacks from TokyoTreat and Sakuraco. Time to experience limited edition and seasonal snacks from Japan from the comfort of your own home with these lovely monthly snack boxes. TokyoTreat is a fun and exclusive monthly snack box that is packed with some of Japan's coolest and funnest treats. Each month, you'll get a Japan exclusive premium snack, a limited edition chip and noodles. This box in particular actually has some really fun looking snacks in here. It might be because it's like based off of Akihabara or Akiba, while Sakuraco is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local snack makers across Japan. Each box is carefully crafted with traditional and seasonal snacks that are hard to come by outside of Japan, like mochi, dorayaki, senbei, and even more. Looks like there's like a good range of both like sweet and savory, which is kind of like a plus or a bonus for me because that's usually my favorite flavor profiles together. But not only that, each box comes with a signature tea as well as a Japanese homeware. And it seems like the Japanese homeware for this time around is the Okinawa Kozara plate, which is this kind of like really cutely designed or cute pattern plate that's perfect to hold all of your little snacks. So both boxes also come with a 24-page cultural guide booklet, and it includes information regarding ingredients and allergen of each of the snacks, but also informs you of little tidbits revolving around culture and traditions in Japan. You can learn about the pop culture in Akiba or even the wildlife in Okinawa. So each of the months also have a different theme, meaning that you get to try out a whole new selection of new treats and snacks every month. For example, TokyoTreat's theme for the month of July is Akiba Snack Quest, which I find very, very fitting, while Sakuraco's box is flavors of Okinawa. So let's go ahead and jump into some tea, because I believe actually I've had this tea before. So this is the Sanpen tea, which apparently it's a jasmine tea, but since we are in kind of like the hotter summer months here in Canada, I'm gonna actually have this one cold rather than hot, and luckily I did, because this one's actually very, very refreshing while cold. It does take a little bit more time to, I guess, steep versus if you were to use hot water though, but I think it's like totally worth it. As for the snacks, I think my favorite from the Sakuraco box was actually this grape warabi mochi. It has a good texture, but also the filling in the center kind of has like the same texture as like red bean, but it has like a grape flavor, if that makes sense. And though I've only had the grape, I'm very excited to also try the lemon version that's included in this pack. And then for TokyoTreat, I actually really like the fish jerky. It might be not everyone's favorite. I'm a fan of like dried squid as a snack. I know it's like usually very tough and very chewy, but this fish jerky kind of gives me the same flavor profile. Even though it's a little bit more mild, it's still really tasty, and I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to chew as well. So this is actually my favorite, but also I really like the kind of like cookies and cream flavor, so I can never go wrong with this particular Kit Kat flavor as well. And on the crunchy side, the pakuru cheese corn puffs was like a very much an instant favorite as well. They kind of remind me of Cheeto Puffs, and it's kind of like a nice light snack. So if you would like to get a box for yourself or want to give these as a lovely gift to friends or family or even your partner, then do check out the links in the description. Thank you again to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Now back to sprucing up that sketch of Rin. Okay, so now that we are back, let me talk about the process. So back then, when I was working on the older version, I believe I was swapping between using the eraser tool and the pen tool at the time, and occasionally using the blur tool to do a little bit of the softer edges. I guess you would see like in her ribbon, some of like parts of her clothes, which looks a little bit odd because some areas are like shaded with this kind of like softer shading with the blur tool, and then everything else is like very much stark black and white. And I was kind of like debating how much do we want to imitate what I was trying to do in the past, and how much do I want to actually just like experiment with right now. So in Paint Tool Sai was kind of like the time when I was kind of like in my experimental digital painting phase. I had like a few 17 drawings and sketches that I had at the time where I was getting the gist of what I think was kind of like digital painting versus how I approach it. I guess it's like kind of similar-ish to how I approach it in Procreate, I guess. But because of that, I do have a little bit more knowledge about how I would want to approach doing a one-layer challenge, because doing one layer, I know that some people say, oh, one layer for digital artists should be easy if you have like a traditional art background, because everything you do in traditional art basically is like quote unquote like on one layer, right? But there is kind of like a catch to that, because usually in traditional art, you do have the luxury of things still being either like permanent on your page, or, you know, things you can kind of use to your advantage. Like if you use a ballpoint pen, a fine liner, anything that's like gonna grip to the page and remain there, you can erase your sketch. So there is a little bit of leeway, as well as like once you lay down your line work or whatever, if it's like, you know, waterproof, you can go in with watercolor, your lines won't budge. Watercolor is transparent, you can build up your layers, etc. But technically you're working on one page, which quote unquote, I guess for digital would be one layer. But for digital art, other than I've seen people have like a background layer, I don't really know why. I feel like that is a little bit of a crutch. But for digital, once you add in like a sketch, or you want to do line art, there isn't really a way for you to do that where you're not already covering up your lines. Now, there are some tools which I'm using kind of like occasionally here and there when I was initially blocking out a lot of the gray tones while I was sketching. So, and there's kind of like 3 tools that I ended up using, while the one that's on the very right, I ended up only using the one tool. So it's not like a for sure one-to-one recreation, I guess. That, and as well as like I'm not doing the same pose, etc., you know, using exactly just only black and white. I am relying a lot on like using grays and stuff, but I thought I'll be fine. But the brushes that I ended up using was my usual sketch brush, which is a brush that I really like in Paint Tool Sai just in general. So I did majority of the sketch for like lines and details with that one first, but because that one has less of like pressure sensitivity in terms of like opacity, the sketch lines are a little bit more harsh, and there's less leeway for me to add gradual grayscaled or like, you know, mid-tone grays in between. So I have more or less like black and white for the most part, but I wanted to add a little bit more towards like shading to hopefully create a little bit of form and lighting and all that stuff. So I ended up using a marker tool, and luckily it does have the effect where if I add the marker on top of my already dark black lines, it just darkens it slightly, but then fills in the white areas actually quite nicely, as long as I didn't paint white in. And for the most part, while I'm sketching, I often just toggle the opacity back and forth to use my, usually the same brush that I'm using for sketching, to be also my eraser. So instead of like constantly going back to the eraser tool to erase like little details, I'll be just toggling a button basically from going to black to transparent and just going back and forth, so I don't have to do as much tool switching. But that marker brush helped me a lot because I could actually kind of treat it a little bit more like traditional art, where I'm kind of doing almost like a marker or an ink wash over top and kind of blocking in some of the gray tone. Now, luckily, that helped me block in a majority of my shadows, as well as like any kind of like variation in the values that I needed. So such as like her little Sailor Scout uniform, whatever you want to call it, the little thing that rests like upon her shoulders, as well as like her arm. there's a lot of things I don't know what they're going to be called for Vocaloid design. So it's kind of like the thing from their forearm till their wrist, as well as their knees till their feet, basically. So they have a lot more like black for those types of like fabric. So I wanted to make sure I made them much darker than the rest of everything else, basically. But once I had pretty much everything established, because I've used Paint Tool Sai probably up until even today, I guess. Paint Tool Sai was kind of like my everything drawing application. I did all of my sketching, my digital painting, my drawing, even like occasional photo editing and stuff, logo making, everything on Paint Tool Sai. And this is like the version 1. I didn't use version 2. I didn't realize there was a version 2 for like a long time. And I feel like it was in beta for quite a while, I think. But I also did like pixel art. I did my frame by frame animations all in Paint Tool Sai until probably COVID-ish season, or even like a little bit after that, I guess. Maybe like 2020, let's see, 2022 maybe? 2023 is when I actually gradually made the switch to Clip Studio Paint instead, and I stopped using Paint Tool Sai like as regularly as like my digital program of choice on my tablet. But because of that, there are some brushes in here that I am a little bit more familiar with, like the paint brush. So if you can see on kind of like the left-hand side where I have my layers and my brushes, there's one that's called paint. And that's what I actually use to do, I think, all of my notebook designs that you guys have seen, like all the floral ones. I've used this paintbrush along with the sketching brush that I used at the very beginning to do all of those illustrations. So I'm very familiar with it for the most part, and I know how it kind of like works. So I decided to use this to kind of fully render out everything else that I needed so I could add some darker tones. I do have a little bit more of an easier time controlling the opacity and it having a bit of like a softer touch so that I can paint in more subtle shadows or lighting here and there and hopefully clean up everything. Also, if you notice, there's like a middle Rin in the middle of like between the canvas that I'm working on and the 2011 version. That one is kind of like the in-between where I feel like I would have just stopped if I wanted to leave it as purely as a very rough sketch. So I had majority of like my values kind of just established in a very basic sense, as well as just having my lines fairly clean. But right now I'm just basically rendering in a very similar way how I would usually do it if I was just digitally painting in general. And I think over the years, learning to do digital paintings helped me quite a bit. Just not be too afraid of, you know, wanting to be able to render or clean up things. Minus the hands here. I feel like the hands are very reminiscent of how I used to sketch anyways, like back when I was younger, because I didn't really fix them up all that much other than leaving them very chunky and like just cleaning up any of the sketchier lines. They're kind of like chunky, as well as they look very unfinished compared to the rest of Rin. But I think it's been a while since I've rendered in this way where it's black and white. I do rely on color quite a bit to fuss around with like some values as well. So while I was doing kind of just the black and white, it felt a little weird sometimes color picking because it just feels like maybe I should just be using only black and white rather than like adding so many different grays in between. But I guess in terms of like treating this as a one layer challenge, it was definitely less challenging than the one that I did on Procreate where I redrew Fischl. On kind of like the one layer challenge as well, because that one's in full color on a colored background, it is a little bit more difficult for me to make sure everything's super clean. This one's a lot easier because the way that I sketch now especially is actually the way that I wanted to sketch back in 2011, where I think before I would sketch on like multiple layers. I wouldn't know how to, I guess like in this case, like almost carve out certain parts while you're drawing. At that time, I feel like I always had to make like very certain shapes, erase the inside to get like the lines that I wanted. But nowadays, like I just sketch kind of like freely and loosely, and then we can clean up as we go so that I can just kind of find my lines naturally rather than blocking out shapes in hopefully like too stiff of a way. I don't think this one is as flowy as I would have liked it to be. I think at the very beginning, I probably sped it up in the time lapse, but I was struggling on thinking of like a pose that I wanted to do for Rin because I wanted something that could show still enough of her her body and stuff so that we can still compare it to the old version. But I didn't know exactly how I wanted to do it because I was seeing whether or not I should have done more of like a one-to-one, but it's very much just like a normal standing pose. So I was like, maybe we'll make it just a little bit more fun, add a little bit of movement here and there, and then just have fun with the rendering portion, I guess. But a part of me wanted to do this because I think mostly it's on Twitter, I think. People have been doing a lot of like showing improvement or showing what their childhood art looks like, or whenever they first started doing digital art and comparing to what it looks like now. I feel like that trend has come back. So I was looking at a lot of people's like progress and I'm like, what was like kind of my first video that I did for the channel? And I was gonna redo my Lovely's fan art. I even started it at some point, but I think that was like at the very beginning of this year that I ended up starting doing kind of like a redraw of it, but I ended up not doing it because it took too much time for me to figure out exactly how I wanted to format the entire video where it's not like 20 times speed, which luckily here, I think total time was just over 2 hours. I think it's like 2:09 according to my footage. So about 2 hours for this entire black and white little drawing of Rin. I think I've talked about this before as well, but a little bit of lore about my username, if you guys can't tell. So Kagamine Rin, because like I mentioned earlier, back in my middle school days, me and my friends were like very obsessed with like Vocaloid. But like me and the friend that got me into drawing initially, me and her, our favorites were Rin and Len. But I think I liked Rin the most. And guess what? The first part of Rin Spirit, the Rin comes from Kagamine Rin. So yeah, my actual name, which is Joanna, has no affiliation with like, you know, Rin by any means. And then In Spirit comes from the fandom name from the Infinite fans, because I was an In Spirit back in like my high school days. So that's where the Rin Spirit comes from. Luckily it just like flows nicely with Rin and In Spirit, so got lucky with that. But we're basically at the end. So here's kind of a closer look at this 2011 version of Rin. So you can kind of see like the little blurred areas and like very blocky, chunky color application, I guess. And then here's kind of like the midway point of where I would say if I needed to do like a very quick sketch and show like values and stuff, I would probably do it like this. So block in like the necessary values that I would need, as well as like maybe establish a little bit of lighting and add a little bit of shading here and there. But if you want to take it a step further, is kind of like where I ended up doing a lot more rendering and started to do actual like painting. So here's kind of like the difference between the two. I actually like the end result. I think it actually looks very cute. I did do a trick where I did select part of her leg that's supposed to be pushed back and selecting part of it so that I could use a airbrush on top of her leg while alpha locking the layer. That way I could kind of like push the leg back without having to actually make a new layer and pasting a white layer on top to make it look a little bit softer. So hopefully it kind of pushes the leg back a little bit. I know I didn't really draw it in the right shape, but you know, it's okay. I'm actually quite pleased with how it looks right here, and I think that's it for today's video. Oh, also, because I won't end it quite yet, I ended up adding the 2 little hair clips that I accidentally missed earlier, but I think that's it. I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!